My name is Ezra Langston. I'm the guy you probably ignored in group meetings. The one who brought his own tea bags to the coffee station. The one who always had a notebook but rarely spoke until he did. I'm not flashy. I don't like loud rooms. And I certainly don't crave attention. But what I do have is memory. Sharp, cold, unforgiving memory. You see, I once had a best friend named Derek Maddox. We met in our final year at Stanford, bonded over code caffeine and the naive belief that brilliance would speak for itself. We had this ritual. Meet at Cafe Linnea every Wednesday, 2 hours before class, sketch business ideas on napkins while pretending not to care about success. Except I did care. And I came up with one idea that mattered: a productivity platform built around adaptive scheduling. Not a glorified calendar, but something that learned you, your habits, your moods, your rhythms. It could nudge you to work smarter by observing when your mind was sharpest. It could reschedule meetings you were going to mentally check out of. It would become your personal manager, but with the emotional intelligence of a best friend. Derek was fascinated. He kept saying things like, "You're onto something, Ezzy. This is big." I trusted him. I shared the name Pulse Point and the tagline I'd written in my sketchbook. Get time on your side. I didn't know he was memorizing more than my notes. I didn't know the meetings he missed weren't due to family emergencies or flu symptoms, but pitch calls. He was using my work, my slides, my code. A month later, I saw the press release. Pulse Point funded by Horizon Ventures. CEO, Derek Maddox. They even used my tagline word for word. I still remember that morning. I was on the light rail halfway to my part-time IT job, scrolling through TechCrunch, and there it was. My blood didn't boil. My fingers didn't shake. I didn't throw my phone or scream. I just stared. Some people get loud when they're wronged. I get quiet. Because when you grow up in a house where your father pays more attention to stock charts than your science fair wins, and your mother praises effort only if it results in victory, you learn that emotion is a luxury. And I had no time for luxury. I took screenshots. I emailed myself every document, every napkin scan, every time-stamped GitHub commit I had. Then I deleted Derek's number and went to work, like it was any other day. But inside me something clicked. Not anger, not revenge, not yet. Just a seed. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this part. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you really like what I have to say here. I finished my shift at the IT help desk that day like normal. Smiled through it. Reset routers. Advised someone on Excel macros. Ate my lunch in silence. That night, I opened a blank terminal window. No templates, no legacy code. Nothing from the Pulse Point I'd designed before. I was going to rebuild it. Not the same product, but the same soul. But this time, I wasn't going to ask for anyone's input, not even Derek's. The first line of code I wrote was for a data ingestion layer that could learn user patterns without ever violating privacy. The second line was a silent promise to myself. You don't need applause to be dangerous. I called the project Sable. No, it wasn't catchy, but it was mine. I worked 16-hour days from a damp studio apartment that always smelled faintly of mold and burnt toast. The radiator banged like a haunted typewriter every morning at 3 a.m. But I barely noticed. And while Derek was doing TEDx talks and raising seed rounds with my stolen birthright, I was building in the dark, coding, testing, recoding, watching Sable learn, adapt, suggest. It was smarter than Pulse Point ever was, and it was just getting started. I didn't post on LinkedIn. I didn't go to meetups. I didn't network. I didn't need the world to notice me. I just needed him to. And the best part, he didn't even know I was still breathing. But I was breathing, thinking, growing. And soon, he'd be calling me sir. Derek vanished from my life just as cleanly as he'd stolen from it. He didn't block me. He didn't call to apologize. He didn't even send one of those vague "hope you're doing well" texts that cowards sometimes use to clear their conscience. Nothing. He just stepped into a world of polished panels and startup conferences, and I was left in the shadows with a half-eaten bowl of instant noodles and a terminal window that never went dark. But the thing about shadows, you can see things others miss. While he was smiling under stage lights, I studied every product demo, every UI video he released for Pulse Point. I watched as they pitched to corporations licensing their Focus Intelligence engine, which was nothing more than a simplified version of what I had prototyped months ago. And I took notes. I didn't rage. I didn't scream. I documented because I knew what he didn't. The pulse point framework was rushed. Their data analysis was brittle. They couldn't scale without crashing memory. And worse, their recommendation engine was built on assumptions, not actual behavior modeling. They were selling a Ferrari with a cardboard engine, and I was quietly building an actual machine. Sable was progressing. I set up a closed beta with 10 volunteers. I trusted introverts, freelancers, startup night owls. I didn't pay them. I didn't need to. These were people who had burned out from mismanaged time and digital distractions. Sable didn't just help them manage it. Predicted the why behind their bad habits. It gave them clarity. It didn't shame. It adapted. I designed it to work silently in the background, learning as you went. It didn't feel like software. It felt like intuition in your pocket. 3 months in those 10 users became 60. No ads, no press. Just a private waitlist passed around Slack groups and forums. Meanwhile, Derek made headlines. One morning, I opened a newsletter and saw Pulse Point raises $4, $5 million in Series A. There was a photo of Derek holding a mug in one hand and standing in front of a whiteboard filled with buzzwords. He wore the same smug grin he used to have when he pretended to challenge my ideas over coffee. Only now, the world was buying it. But here's the thing about funding rounds. They come with expectations. You raise big, you better grow fast. I knew what he didn't. Pulse Point was already plateauing. Their core wasn't sticky enough. Their churn rate was masked by marketing fluff. Their user complaints were growing quietly on Reddit threads and niche review blogs. I smiled. Because I wasn't chasing funding, I was chasing permanence. Sable hit 2,000 users 6 months after I launched it privately. Still no ads, still no noise, just quiet obsession. Then one day, an email popped into the support inbox I'd set up. From Derek Pulse Point Labs. Cool. Subject, product inquiry. I read it 3 times before I breathed. He didn't recognize me. The email was generic, even a bit desperate. He introduced himself as if I didn't know him, complimented our UI, and asked about potential partnership or white label options. I leaned back in my chair. So he had noticed. He didn't know who built Sable, but he knew it was better than his. I didn't reply. Instead, I spent 2 days doing nothing but refining the onboarding flow for new users, tightening the feedback loop, smoothing the UX. That was my response. You don't answer fire with fire. You answer it with precision. A week later, another email arrived. Subject, follow-up on potential collaboration. Still polite. Still blind. And then, the kicker. I'm impressed by the personalization engine behind your tool. We've been struggling to match user behavior with actual task outcomes. Would love to learn more about your approach or explore hiring someone from your dev team if you're expanding. I laughed. Out loud. Alone. For the first time in months. He was trying to hire my team. There was no team. There was just me. One man, one betrayal, one mission. So I replied, briefly, from my alias, email, the one tied to Sable's growth lead. Hey, Derek, thanks for reaching out. Let's talk. What kind of partnership are you imagining? L. He didn't know that A.L. stood for After Langston, a code I created when I first committed to outgrowing my past, my betrayal, and his name. We set a call. He showed up in a hoodie with his company name on the chest, camera on smile fake. I stayed off cam, used a voice modulator. Told him we were a distributed team, mostly remote, didn't show faces until contracts were involved. He bought it. Hook, line, ego. He pitched an idea. Pulse Point could license Sable's engine as a back end, while they kept their UI. I asked what he'd offer in return. His tone changed. Suddenly he was selling again. Promising equity. Cross-branding, collaboration, power. The same voice that once whispered, Ezra, we're going to change the world together. I smiled into the mic, and I said, let me think about it. Then I made another decision. I was going to make him work for me, not metaphorically. Literally. Not just under my brand, under my name, under my rules. He would carry my ambition on his back, thinking it was his salvation. And when he realized who I was, it would be far, far too late. I didn't reply to Derek for a week. Silence is a language, and I speak it fluently. It makes the other person fill in the blanks, dig their own psychological hole. By the time I finally responded, he was already leaning forward, probably wondering if he'd blown his shot at salvaging his dying company. My email was clean, nonchalant. We're considering expanding into external consulting. If you're open to exploring full-time integration, we might have a solution. I had already begun crafting a new branch of Sable, a shell company really called Pinnacle Integrations. It looked legit. Slick branding a landing page with phrases like architects of adaptive intelligence and trusted by forward thinkers in digital productivity. All of it nonsense, but dressed like a Harvard MBA thesis. Why? Because Derek wouldn't hand over control to a shadow. But he would hand over control to someone he thought was smarter than him. I scheduled a formal Zoom interview for him. Yes, an interview. He thought we were meeting to discuss partnership strategy. I opened with Derek. We're intrigued by your enthusiasm, but for full integration, we'd prefer to assess your technical and creative fit. Our founder is big on team culture. He swallowed that like candy. Of course he did. He still thought he was the superior founder in the room. But now he was in my room. I gave him a case assignment. You'll receive access to a partial sandbox of our behavioral algorithm. We'd like you to improve its time clustering heuristics and deliver a write-up of potential enhancements. He didn't know he was about to re-engineer the very system he stole from me 5 years ago. Only now it was smarter, meaner, and booby-trapped with decoys. His write-up arrived 3 days later. 13 pages. Diagrams, flow logic, suggested tweaks. He took it seriously. He even mentioned offhand how intimidatingly clean the base code was. I stared at that sentence for a while. Intimidatingly clean. You're welcome, Derek. The next meeting I brought in my voice unmodulated, introduced myself as Ezra's head of product. I'd hired an actor to play the founder, a woman named Eliza, with a polished accent and firm tone. She appeared briefly on camera, made a few approving comments, and disappeared. It was all theater, smoke, mirrors. And Derek, he was completely sold. A week later, he signed a contractual consulting agreement that required full deliverables, weekly reports, and 247 Slack availability. The terms buried him in scope creep and vague milestone language, exactly how he once buried me, in silence and betrayal. Now, he had deadlines. He had check-ins. He had to answer to someone. I renamed his project file internally to Reclamation. DM. None rolled dust. Let me be clear. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about order. Restoring it. I wasn't going to scream, "You stole from me," into a courtroom. That's for people who want to be pitied. I wanted him trapped, earning a paycheck from the idea he once called too idealistic. I even gave him a direct manager, an intern I trusted, 19 years old, working remotely from Jakarta, who knew nothing about Derek's past, but treated him like a confused middle manager. Derek never objected. He asked for clarification politely. He said absolutely a lot. He scheduled meetings at 6 a.m. His time, because that's just how startups work. You should have seen the Slack logs. He was building our architecture. My architecture, with all the zeal of a man chasing relevance. And every line he wrote was another inch of rope. Then came the kicker. 1 month into his contract, we had a milestone summit. A virtual review of product alignment with our long-term roadmap. He presented slides, graphs, a feature demo. He called it Pulse Intelligence Pro. Oh, Derek, always recycling. He didn't even realize the irony. He was pitching a feature inside my system using a name inspired by his broken one. When he wrapped, I unmuted. Impressive, I said calmly. But I noticed something interesting. I paused. Your heuristic clustering, it's almost identical to a prototype I built 6 years ago. You wouldn't happen to know anything about Pulse Point, would you? The screen froze for just a second. Then Derek chuckled nervously. Yeah, that was my old startup. You've done your homework. Of course, I replied. I like to understand the patterns of people I work with. The silence that followed was almost religious. He knew. He didn't say it aloud, not yet, but I could see it in the way he straightened his posture, the shift in his eyes. He was calculating the odds. Was I who he thought I was? Could it really be me? Then I clicked a button and screen shared a folder titled Langston Archives. 2017. Inside were images of napkin sketches. GitHub commits. A PDF of the original PulsePoint prototype, time-stamped. My name, Ezra Langston, on every page. Just for transparency, I said, voice even. We like to understand the full trajectory of our contributors. He didn't speak. Not that day. Not for 3 days, actually. Not a single Slack message. Then finally he wrote, Ezra, I didn't know. I thought you disappeared. I didn't think you. He stopped mid-sentence. He didn't finish the message. Instead, he reacted with a thumbs-up emoji on a post from my intern, reminding him to submit his weekly report. You see, he did know. But he also knew he needed this job, and I needed him to need it. There's a special kind of power in silence. Not the passive kind, the active, loaded, watchful kind. The kind that says, I see you. I remember, and I don't have to scream to prove it. That was the air around Derek now. You could feel it in every Slack message he sent, overly polite, punctuated with too many exclamation points. He had stopped suggesting features. He had stopped ideating. He had turned into exactly what I wanted, an obedient executor of someone else's vision, mine. At that point, he still hadn't formally acknowledged the truth, not directly, but every choice he made screamed it louder than any apology ever could. He knew I was Ezra. He knew I'd built this, and he knew I was in control. The week after the silent revelation, I sent him an assignment. It wasn't just any task. It was the task. I called it Priority Initiative. Rhythm Sync Engine Refactor, which sounds technical, and it was, but here's the twist. It was the exact feature he gutted from my original PulsePoint prototype. The one he said was too complex for users to appreciate. I wanted him to build it again, only this time properly, only this time for me. The irony was delicious. He would rewrite the very function he dismissed and replace it inside the architecture that had buried his product alive. And he said yes. No protest. Just a quiet understood. I'll prioritize that this week. By now, Sable had ballooned. We crossed 15,000 users. We were getting write-ups on Medium, thought pieces, mentions in newsletters. It was still low profile, but the kind of low profile that made insiders feel smart for using it. And we had one major partnership pending, something real, something with teeth. A Fortune 100 consulting firm was piloting Sable across 400 employees. If it stuck, we were entering enterprise territory, the kind of territory Derek never reached. But I wasn't interested in gloating. I was interested in building. And Derek, he was just another builder now. Sometimes I'd observe him on internal video calls. He'd nod too much, agree too easily. He looked tired. Not just physically, mentally worn, like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. It never did. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about letting him live with it. I even gave him compliments. Sparse, quiet ones. Good work on the handoff protocol. Smart thinking on the fallback loop. Each time he replied with a quick, thanks, we'll keep optimizing. He didn't dare be casual. He didn't dare overstep. He was now the very thing he had once mocked in me. Restrained, reserved, humble. One afternoon, I got a message from our intern, Aisha. Hey, just FYI, Derek asked if we do team happy hours. Wanted to know if we ever meet IRL. Then thought that was weird. He seemed nervous asking. Anyway, I said no. Hope that was okay. I laughed. The man who once couldn't wait to be the center of a startup party was now hoping for one just to test the waters, to see if I'd show up, if I'd reveal my hand. I never did. Instead, I kept him busy. More refactors, more back-end builds. Every once in a while, I'd slide in a line of code I knew he'd recognize from the past. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted him to feel it, to see that fingerprint and remember who it belonged to. One night, I logged on late. It was nearly 2 a.m. My terminal glowed in the darkness. Derek was online. Status, active. I watched him in the shared workspace, editing, testing, pushing commits. I opened the activity log and just observed. For an hour he worked, silent, efficient, alone. It was poetic. This was the man who had once stood on stages quoting Steve Jobs and toasting with investors in rooftop lounges. Now, he was a ghost in a Slack channel, and I had no intention of exercising him. A few days later, he finally broke the silence. Ezra, I know I can't undo what I did. I just want to say I'm sorry. You built something better than I ever could. I get that now. It came at 3. Wiring up. Beams, my time. No formatting, no drama. Just text. I read it once, twice. Then I did something very on brand. I replied with a single line. Focus on the next milestone. Deliverables due Friday? That was it. No absolution, no flame war, no tearful confessions. He understood. He responded. Of course. You'll have them early. I sat back. The man who once laughed at my ambition now stayed up late to meet my deadlines. He was chasing validation from a shadow, his shadow, and I would never give him the satisfaction of knowing if he'd earned it. You see, real revenge doesn't come in flames. It comes in systems, in routines, in quietly becoming the gravity that someone else orbits without ever realizing they're not free. The thing about long games is they require discipline, not just the kind where you work late and eat ramen in a studio apartment. I'm talking about emotional discipline, resisting the urge to clap back, to post screenshots, to go viral. That's amateur vengeance. I was after legacy, and that meant never letting Derek know how much I still remembered. So when his next Slack message came through this time about a bug in the scheduling predictor, I responded like any other boss would. Good catch. Loop in DevOps. Let me know if it persists. No bitterness. No heat. Just clean impersonal management. Because that's what we were now. A manager. Employee. Once we were dreamers on cafe couches, building ideas with dry erase markers and cold hands. Now, he was another cog. And I was the clockmaker. By now, we were onboarding Sable into its largest contract yet. The consulting firm had gone all in. 10,000 seats tiered rollout across 3 departments. If it stuck, we'd cross $8 million ARR within the year. We had real infrastructure now, compliance audits, account managers, even legal review. Real software, real stakes. So I did what every good founder does during scale. I delegated, and I promoted. I made Derek a senior integration engineer, which in our org meant the same thing as a glorified implementer. He got a pay bump, a longer contract, and even more meetings where he was expected to listen, not lead. I could almost hear the voice in his head. This can't be what I was meant for. But he stayed. Because I paid well. Because the software was brilliant. Because I think deep down he still believed he could win me over, climb back into relevance. Every now and then, he'd send a suggestion. Hey, Ezra. Just a thought, would love to explore bundling Sable with an onboarding AI assistant for new users. I think we could position it as. I never shut him down. I let him hope. And then I redirected him to someone else, loop Aisha in, or run that by Caleb on UX. A slow erosion of ego, one polite deferral at a time. See, the best revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's making them irrelevant in the system they thought they could control. One day Aisha pinged me in private. Random. But Derek seems off, like down. Not sure if it's burnout or what. He keeps volunteering for stuff. Weird, right? It wasn't burnout. It was realization. He was finally feeling the weight of everything he wasn't. So I did something I hadn't done before. I invited him to a one-on-one. No cameras. Just audio. When he joined the call, there was a long pause. I heard the shift in his breath. Hey, Ezra, he said, voice a little hoarse. Hey, Derek, how are things? He asked. Growing. Yeah, he replied. Sable's everywhere now. I waited. He continued, I still think about the early days. That cafe, those napkin ideas. I didn't respond. He kept going like a man on the edge of a confession, but unsure of the language. You always had something different. I didn't see it clearly then. I was just hungry. For attention. For validation. I let the silence stretch. You ever think about what might have happened if we'd... No, I cut in. He went quiet. Because I'm not interested in hypotheticals, Derek. Only results. Right? He said, voice small. Of course. That was the moment he understood, truly, understood that there was no going back, no clean arc, no forgiveness monologue waiting at the end of this. There was only now. And in this now, he was an employee of the man he stole from. After the call, I sent him a task, draft onboarding flow for Level 3 enterprise clients. Include 90-day engagement metrics. Need by EOD Thursday. No comment about the conversation, no softness, just another rope for him to pull. Because this wasn't personal anymore. This was structural. I didn't want revenge for the 15 minutes he stole. I wanted 40 hours a week of him making it right, over and over again. And the brilliance of it, He would never know when he'd done enough, because the meter never stops running. There's a strange satisfaction in watching a man work for what he once stole. Not in the cruel way, no cackling behind screens or burning effigies. It's quieter than that, like watching a clock run backward or an old building being repurposed into something beautiful. Derek didn't know it, but every project I assigned him was rooted in a scar. Every deadline, every module, every micro-feature, it all had a history. He was unknowingly rebuilding the empire he tried to burn. But here's the twist. Most people don't see coming. I didn't hate him. Not anymore. Hatred takes energy. Energy I needed for product roadmaps, compliance meetings, scaling strategies. What I felt now was cold or detached ownership of someone else's fate. He made a decision years ago. Now he simply lived in its outcome. And the outcome was this. He logged 42 hours a week inside a system I created under a brand. He had no control over working on a vision he once laughed at. I'd even forgotten to remove his consultant status in our org chart. He was labeled like a temporary fixture, because in my eyes, he was. But the thing about Derek is he was desperate to matter again. That's how I knew I had him. A few weeks later, our COO reached out. Hey, we've got an opening for a permanent engineering manager role on the integration team. Derek's already doing the work. Any objection to formalizing it? I stared at that email. A manager of a team inside the company built on the code he stole. Reporting to a leadership org, he once thought he'd lead himself. I typed back, no objection. Just make sure the NDA clause is airtight. And just like that, it was done. Derek Maddox, former startup darling, now a middle manager in a company whose true founder never even needed to put his name on the door. To make it even more surreal, HR scheduled a welcome post on Slack. Please join us in welcoming Derek Maddox to his new role as engineering manager for the integration systems team. Derek's been instrumental in helping Sable scale its enterprise implementation. We're thrilled to have him on board in a permanent capacity. Reactions rolled in. He replied with a smiley face. The same man who once pitched my idea as his own, now grateful to be noticed inside the machine he tried to outrun. That same week, I rolled out a new internal policy. All managers must participate in weekly founder syncs. Just 15 minutes. One-on-one with me. No cámaras. Just voices. When his name appeared on the calendar, I saw the hesitation in his Slack ping. Hey, Ezra. Just confirming if the sync is still on. I replied instantly. Yes. Always. He joined the call right on time. There was a pause. Hey, he said. Let's talk roadmap, I replied. For 10 minutes, we reviewed deployment feedback, new client segments, feature pipelines. I gave him tasks, asked direct questions. He answered them all. Efficient. Measured. A man walking carefully across a frozen lake. Then just as we were wrapping, he said, I know I'm not owed anything, Ezra, but I'm trying to make things right. I didn't say anything. I let the words hang there. Then, I know I said, and I ended the call, because that's all he gets. Acknowledgement, not absolution. The past doesn't get rewritten, but sometimes if you're lucky, you get to stand on it. I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. I was interested in architecture, in building the kind of ecosystem where betrayal was no longer a threat, but a source of fuel, where every wrong turn someone else took only carved a sharper path for me. I once believed that my future had been stolen. Now I know better. It was delayed, and it returned. With interest. There's something sacred in letting people earn their way back into the orbit of the thing they broke, without ever letting them near the controls again. That was Derek now. Orbiting, always moving, always contributing, never in control. And me, I was just getting started. The most surreal moment in this entire journey didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened at a gas station. A nothing day. I'd just come back from an investor lunch across town low-key. Just a handshake round, making early noises about Series B. My car was almost out of fuel, and I pulled into a shell off the highway, the kind of place that smells like dust, burnt coffee, and road trip gum. And there he was, Derek, standing in line with a bottled water and a pack of mints. He didn't see me at first. I was behind him, sunglasses on, hoodie up, looking like a ghost. But when he turned to leave, he caught my eyes and froze. His face didn't twist with fear. It didn't go red with shame. It just went still. We stood there in silence for maybe 5 seconds. maybe longer. And then he nodded. A quiet nod. Not deferential, not smug, just human. I nodded back. And that was it. No words, no apologies, no cinematic confrontations in the snack aisle. I got back in my car and drove home. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even satisfied. I was something else entirely. Complete. It's easy to get drunk on revenge stories, the big takedowns, the viral call-outs, the fantasy courtroom victories. But the truth is, most revenge doesn't come with applause. It comes with ownership. I didn't destroy Derek. I hired him. I didn't expose him. I gave him responsibility under conditions I controlled inside structures he couldn't navigate alone. And that was more powerful than any expose. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the gas station moment already felt like a scene from someone else's life. Because I had leveled up, Derek wasn't my ghost anymore. He was a footnote. Back in the office, we were preparing to roll out Sable V3, our first major enterprise-class rebuild. The product was leaner, faster, and had a new predictive analytics dashboard powered by an AI model I co-developed with a PhD out of Cambridge. We were becoming something real, not a feature, not a startup, a platform. Derek was leading one of the teams now. He had 3 engineers under him, none of whom knew his history. To them, he was just Derek, the guy who always answered Slack messages quickly and sent follow-ups even when no one asked. Funny how full circles look more like loops. During our next Founders Sync, he didn't bring up the gas station. Neither did I. Instead, he said, "We've hit a bottleneck on the third-party auth sync. Mind if I refactor the pathway with a lightweight middleware?" I nodded. "You know what's best. Just make sure it's containerized." And that was it. That was how we moved now. Clean, quiet, structured. But afterward, I did something unusual. I opened his profile in our system. There it was. Derek Maddox, Senior Integration Manager. Underneath his role, I typed a note one, only I could see. Keep your enemies close. Keep your thieves on payroll. Then I closed the tab. That same week, we were nominated for Inc., 500's Most Innovative Companies list. A small PR team had finally found our story. Mysterious founders, no outside funding, quietly eating market share from the inside out. One writer asked, "So, who came up with the original idea for Sable?" I smiled, and I said, "That's the wrong question. The right one is who rebuilt it the right way." They loved that quote. It made the piece. Derek shared it on LinkedIn, congratulating the company. I liked the post. No comment. Just a like. That's how it works now. He gets to speak. I get to be heard. The further I rise, the smaller he becomes in the rearview mirror. And the most beautiful part, he's helping build the very road I'm using to drive away from him. Every feature, every commit, every hour, he's contributing to his own irrelevance. And I never had to raise my voice. There's a term in architecture, load-bearing wall. It's the kind of wall you can't knock down without the entire structure coming apart. That's what Derek became. He didn't know it. But I'd slowly made him essential not to the product, but to the infrastructure. He was the one answering 2A. Bug tickets from the Eastern European team. He was the one juggling the boring compliance requests and multi-client sync conflicts. None of it was glorious. All of it was necessary. And here's the beautiful irony. He excelled at it. Some people only shine in the dark corners of someone else's spotlight. Every startup has its heroes. Every empire needs its janitors. He just didn't know he'd been drafted into the second category. One Friday afternoon, we were in a leadership sync. Derek was presenting a multi-tenant integration proposal. His screen share was crisp. He'd done his homework. The presentation was solid. He fielded questions like a pro, even cracked a joke about Sable's ability to predict when you're most likely to rage quit a project. People laughed. It was normal. I watched the call quietly, camera off. Just my initials glowing in the corner. When the meeting ended, he lingered. I didn't say anything, but he messaged me later. "Appreciate the space to grow. I know where I came from. I hope I'm helping." I stared at the sentence. He knew. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was just hoping the work had become enough. That it had counted, but I wasn't interested in closure. I was interested in clarity. So I sent a short reply. "Keep executing. The system rewards consistency." And it does. Because while Derek was focused on executing tasks, I was focused on executing leverage. A month later, our largest enterprise client offered us an acquisition deal. Not the whole company, just the enterprise division of Sable. They wanted to white label it. License, the back end embedded into their HR workflow. The offer, $22 million. Non-exclusive, scalable, recurring. I didn't celebrate. I did what I always do. I strategized. The deal would require a full handoff team, documentation, transition support, engineering alignment. And who was best positioned to manage all of that? Derek. I made him the project lead, not because he was brilliant, because he was embedded. Because when you've been stitched into the foundation of a system, you didn't build. You're not a leader. You're an anchor. We flew him out for the first transition summit. It was his first time on a plane since Pulse Point died. He wore a clean blazer, tucked shirt, new glasses. He even sent me a photo from the airport lounge. Not bad for a guy who couldn't finish CS-321 without help, huh? I didn't reply, because I remember who wrote half that assignment. I remember the night I stayed up debugging it while he flirted with a girl from Econ. But now, he was in a WeWork conference room in Atlanta, shaking hands with execs from a company that had never heard of Pulse Point. They knew me. They knew Sable. And they knew Derek as the guy who really understands our back end. That was his legacy now. Not founder, function. And yet, a small part of me admired him. Not for the theft, not for the betrayal, but for his endurance, for staying, for building what he once tried to steal. He didn't crumble. He adapted. Maybe that's why I never cut him loose, because he became a symbol not of failure, but of repurposing. He was proof that even broken pieces can serve in a system if you shape them right. And if you're patient enough, you can turn betrayal into payroll. The acquisition went through in early fall. $22 million transferred in clean tranches. 3-year licensing deal. Scaled support. NDA-laced onboarding for their engineers. And Derek? He became the face of the transition on paper at least. His name appeared in the documentation index, the footers, the onboarding decks. For integration questions, contact Derek Maddox. I never gave a press statement, never signed an article. Because the best revenge isn't always being credited. It's knowing your silence is louder than someone else's resume. And now, Derek's entire job was to explain my architecture to strangers, to sell it, to support it, to defend it. I watched him once during a client webinar. He was polished, professional, confident again, but in a different way. Gone was the TEDx sparkle. Gone was the desperation to be the visionary. He'd been stripped of illusion. And all that remained was a man who knew systems better than he knew self. He even said during the Q&A, the core behavioral engine wasn't something we rushed. It evolved from years of quiet iteration. That word again. He used it like he belonged, like he'd always been part of the idea. And technically now, he was, but not the way he wanted. I'd given him a different kind of ownership, one that came with expectations, not control. And he wore it well. We onboarded more clients. The enterprise revenue stabilized. Sable became two things at once, a product and a machine. One built on forgotten coffee shop sketches and quiet betrayal. I started stepping back, not because I was tired, because I was preparing something else. See, I never planned to spend my whole life chasing the ghost of Pulse Point. Sable was the resurrection, but I was already building the next thing, codenamed Cinder. Cinder wouldn't just track productivity. It would predict burnout, not just based on hours, but on invisible markers, keyboard rhythm, mouse, movement, even sentiment analysis from internal comms. It was deeper, more intimate, more controversial, and it was mine, completely. One night, I invited Derek to a private call. Got something new I'm incubating, I said. Early days, but I want your eyes on it. He hesitated but agreed. I showed him mock-ups, schematics, early wireframes. He leaned forward, scanning the dashboard. This is intense, he muttered. It's like reading someone's soul. Exactly, I said. But it needs to be handled with care. There was a long silence. Then he looked up at the screen. You want me on this? Eventually, I said, but only if you're ready. That was the trap. Because ready meant obedient. It meant building without questioning. It meant knowing who really held the blueprint. He nodded slowly. I'm in. Whatever you need. I ended the call. No NDA. No email follow-up. Just enough to plant the seed. I needed him invested not in the product, but in me, and it worked. The next day he sent a message. Been thinking about Cinder all night. You're onto something again. Happy to help however I can. Of course you are, Derek. Of course you are. Because this time you didn't steal the idea. I gave it to you. And that difference, that subtle shift in power, it's everything. Because now I didn't just own your work. I owned your loyalty. The kind of loyalty born not from admiration, but from debt. And debt, that's the kind of chain you can't see, but you carry it everywhere. Every login, every line of code, every yes, I'll handle that. He still didn't know how deep it ran. But I did. I always did. I didn't launch Cinder right away. The idea wasn't fully cooked. But more than that, I needed time to watch Derek, to see how far he'd bend without breaking, to test the limits of his redemption. Because trust, that wasn't the game anymore. The game was alignment. Could he follow? Not blindly, but completely. He didn't know that I was feeding him features of Cinder piece by piece, disguised as efficiency audits and data anomaly studies. I framed them like internal tasks, feedback loops, curiosity explorations. He took the bait every time. One night, he even slacked me. Something's brewing here, huh? These requests feel like the foundation of something bigger. I replied, always is. Keep going. I knew he was trying to prove something, trying to demonstrate loyalty, and so I gave him chances to do exactly that. One of our newer engineers, Smart Ambitious, flagged Derek's integration logic during code review. She left a few blunt comments on Git. This structure's bloated. We can shave this down by 40%. Too many fallback conditions. This could become recursive hell. Derek took it personally. I could tell. His tone in Slack shifted, shorter sentences, longer pauses between replies. His usual, "Let me know what you think," was replaced by, "Updated. Let me know if it passes." He was stewing. The old Derek, the one from Pulse Point, would have fought back, justified everything, defended his genius. But now he DM'd me. "If you think she's a better fit for this architecture, I can step aside." There it was. Submission, but not out of humility. Out of fear. He'd tasted irrelevance once. He wasn't going to risk it again. I messaged him back. "She's sharp. But you're the one who sees the whole arc. Keep going. Just adapt." He replied, "Understood. I'll make it leaner." He did. 3 hours later, the comments were resolved. The code was cleaner. The ego, even more tightly wrapped. Another inch of rope. Another test passed. He was becoming something rare. A man whose ambition had finally been put on a leash and handed to the one he once betrayed. I started looping him in more. Cinder's early predictive model needed testing across our existing Sable user base. I asked Derek to coordinate anonymized behavioral summaries and build the integration hooks for Cinder's scoring system. He was honored. "Happy to," he said. "This feels important." I didn't disagree, but I didn't tell him what I really saw in his behavior charts, because buried in the anonymized usage patterns was something odd. One user who logged longer hours than anyone else, odd hours, irregular break patterns, a click rhythm that screamed anxiety, keyboard latency that flared during certain meetings. I filtered the logs by IP. It was Derek. He was breaking himself for a system that didn't need him to. And that's when I realized he wasn't loyal. He was haunted. He thought if he worked hard enough, long enough, if he kept his head down and delivered consistently, maybe, just maybe, I'd say the words he needed to hear. "You're forgiven." But I never would. Because forgiveness lets a person return to who they were. And I didn't want Derek to go back. I wanted him like this. "So sharp, bud." Disciplined. Controlled. So I let him keep chasing. One Friday afternoon, I sent a company-wide email. Big progress on the upcoming behavioral intelligence framework. Huge thanks to Derek for leading our integration strategy. Your work will shape how we scale into the next generation. Dozens of emojis followed. Derek replied publicly, humbled to be part of it. "Let's keep building." He didn't know it, but he was quoting my exact words from an old text I sent him in 2016. After we first mapped out Pulse Point. "Let's keep building." Back then he took my code and ran with it. Now, he runs because I let him. I looked at his reply one last time and archived the thread. Another chapter closed. Another proof of concept this time, not of software, but of human recursion. You can make a man rebuild what he once stole. You can make him call it growth. You can make him proud of it. And if you're careful, you can make him believe it was all his idea. Every founder has a moment where they step back and look at the thing they built. Not the product, but the machine around it. The people, the process, the rituals, the unspoken codes. Mine came on a Wednesday. It was quiet, just before sunset. I'd stayed late at the office, an actual office now, not a studio apartment with peeling paint and a humming mini fridge. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling. The skyline flickered in the glass. And there I was, standing alone in the war room, reviewing a wall of digital Post-its for our Cinder rollout. And at the center of it all, Derek's initials. Not once, not twice. Repeated. DM on flowcharts, on integration nodes, on fallback logic for the burnout predictor. He was everywhere. And that's when I realized I had done it. He'd gone from saboteur to infrastructure. Not because I needed him. Because I designed the system in a way where he needed it. It wasn't about keeping him close for revenge anymore. It was about containment. There's a kind of revenge that doesn't end with someone falling. It ends with them serving. That night, I opened the archive folder where I kept all the old Pulse Point artifacts. My sketches, my original pitch deck, the GitHub timestamps, the emails he never answered, the betrayal in digital ink. I moved it all to a new folder, renamed it, resolved. I didn't delete it. Closure isn't about deletion. It's about changing the location of the wound. From center stage to storage. The next day, Derek messaged me. Cinder's adaptive trigger model is getting some love. Great feedback from internal QA. I replied, excellent. Let's prepare the public roadmap. Feature freeze next week. We moved on. Clean. Precise. And then came the curveball. One of our angel investors, a sharp ex-VC named Marla, reached out. She'd seen Derek's name in our engineering updates and wanted to know more. That the same Derek Maddox from PulsePoint. Didn't he crash and burn a few years ago? I replied with one line. People change, sometimes for the better, especially when they're being led. She didn't ask again, but I could feel the undertone in her silence. Why keep him around? Why not cut him loose? Simple. Because everyone's watching him rebuild the thing he once broke. That's good PR in disguise. Redemption stories sell especially when the audience doesn't know who's writing the script. Derek had become a symbol of resilience, but only I knew it wasn't his. It was mine. At the next all-hands meeting, I finally turned my camera on. Company-wide Zoom, dozens of little squares, 100 faces, energy, excitement, anticipation for the new Cinder era. And then there I was, Ezra Langston. Camera live? It startled some of the newer hires. They'd never seen me outside Slack threads and email blurbs. I smiled clean and calm. Before we talk about features and forecasts, I said I want to thank the builders, especially the ones who've weathered storms, reinvented themselves, put their heads down, and delivered consistently. I saw Derek square. He was frozen, still, breathless. His lips parted slightly like he wasn't sure what to expect. I kept going. Products don't succeed because of visionaries. They succeed because of finishers. People who show up again and again. Who learn, adapt. Serve the system, not their ego. I held the silence. Then, Derek, thank you. Your work on Cinder has been exceptional. A pause. Then, we're lucky to have you. The room lit up with claps and reaction. Huh. Derek lowered his eyes. He nodded. He muttered a thank you. But I knew what it cost him. Because that praise, it wasn't absolution. It was command. It meant, stay useful. It meant, your penance continues. It meant, you belong here now, but not the way you think. And for the first time in a long time, he finally stopped trying to impress me. Because deep down, he realized he already had. Just not in the way he hoped. As winter approached, so did the next phase of our rollout. Cinder was nearly ready for limited release, and Derek, whether he knew it or not, was the final stress test. Not just of the system's technical durability, but of its human architecture. We'd built something that could map behavior with unnerving precision. We could tell within a 92% accuracy margin when a user was close to mental fatigue. We could predict disengagement, burnout, even micro-dips in performance, based on subtle behavioral cues. Hesitations before clicks, typos, repeat queries. And guess who generated the training data? Derek Maddox. His obsessive work habits, his frantic Slack sessions, his erratic work cycles, they were gold. His behavior had seeded the model that would soon guide teams around the world. I never told him that. Why would I? Some data sets don't need acknowledgement. They just need usefulness. I looped him into the launch prep meetings, client rollout documents, even the demo calls with 2 of our pilot customers. He was nervous. You could tell. In one call, he stammered a little while presenting, something I hadn't seen since the early days. He was worried. About failing. No, about disappointing me. I watched it play out, his need to be affirmed, to be chosen, and I never gave him too much. Just enough to keep the leash taut. Good pacing, I said after the call. Let's refine your talking points. He nodded, eyes bright like a dog that's just been told good boy for the first time in years. But here's the thing. Cinder wasn't just a product. It was my reset button. The closing chapter of the story he tried to write without me. And as we prepped for the press release, the product reveal, and the quiet rollout, to over 40 enterprise teams, we held one final dry run presentation. Derek presented the back-end infrastructure live to our internal team. It was flawless. And when he finished, there was this moment. Stillness. No one said anything. Until I unmuted and said simply, well done. Not more. Not less. Just, well done. And he beamed. He beamed like someone who had won something. And in a way, maybe he had. Because Derek hadn't just rebuilt his career. He'd rebuilt it inside the walls of the very thing he once destroyed. And those walls, they had my fingerprints in every corner. That night, I got a message from him. Long, vulnerable. The kind that only comes when a man's armor finally rusts off. Ezra, I just want to say, I know I don't deserve to be here, but I'm proud to be part of what you've built. I've never learned more in my life, never worked harder, and I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't reply, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because closure doesn't always need a conversation. Sometimes the silence is the message. A week later, Cinder launched quietly. No media circus, just a clean rollout. Within 72 hours, we hit 12,000 active users. And every time I opened the analytics dashboard, every time I saw our retention curve rise, our AI model self-adjust, our fatigue scores trend down, I saw his data, his patterns, his broken rhythms, fueling a better system. I sat back one night, sipping tea in my office, city lights blinking through the windows, and I whispered it. Not out loud, not with venom, just to myself. You work for me now, not just on payroll, not just in code, in legacy, and no matter what titles come or go. That's the kind of ownership that never expires. After Cinder's successful rollout, the noise began to creep in. Journalists, podcasters, thought leaders, the kind who sniff out a shift in the market before it goes mainstream. They started asking questions not about the product, but about the people behind it. Who built this? Who's the architect behind the AI layer? Where did this idea come from? I declined every interview. Every single one. I wasn't interested in being the face. I was already the framework. But Derek, he gave one unofficial, off the cuff. A mid-tier startup blog reached out and he said yes, not because he wanted to steal credit. No, those days were over. He wanted to belong, to be useful, to justify his second life. The article wasn't bad. He praised the product, talked about adaptive intelligence and enterprise fatigue. And then this line, I didn't invent Cinder, I just helped refine it. The original architecture came from someone who understood burnout before the rest of us caught up. He never said my name. He didn't need to. Those who knew, knew. That line spread quietly through our network. Investors, clients, engineers. I got emails from 2 VCs I hadn't spoken to in years. Your ghost is building interesting things again. That's what they call Derek now, my ghost. He haunted the industry, whispering value, reminding people that something bigger was moving in the background. And I kept building. Because revenge isn't a destination. It's a process. One you learn to perfect. Then scale, then license. 6 weeks after Cinder's launch, we released the first usage case study. Employee engagement up 38%. Burnout flags reduced by 44%. Enterprise contract renewals at 92%. All based on a system partially trained by the behavior of a man who once tried to erase me. And now, he was featured on page 5 of the Internal Impact Report. Contributions, Derek Maddox, Senior Integration Manager. His section was technical dry buried behind bigger names. No spotlight, but there, permanent. I watched as people clapped for the report in Slack. Derek didn't say anything. He just reacted with a checkmark emoji. A small thing. Quiet. Understated, but I recognized what it meant. He'd accepted his role, not the role he wanted, but the one he earned. At our quarterly town hall, we brought in new team leads, celebrated milestones, shared wins. When we closed the call, I stayed back in the Zoom room for a second, and there he was still online. "Derek," I said, "good work." "Thanks," he replied a little too fast. I could tell he'd been hoping for that all meeting. I paused, then added, "You've come a long way." He smiled but didn't say anything, because even he knew. I didn't mean the job. I meant the penance. That night, I updated the internal org map, gave him a new title, Systems Reliability Architect. Not a promotion, just a reshuffle. A role that would put him even deeper into the machine, into the bones of what I was about to build next. Because Cinder wasn't the end. It was a test bed. The next product, already in design, a cognitive overlay that wouldn't just track burnout, but anticipate emotional volatility. It would require sensitive data, high-trust pipelines, and someone to carry the back-end burden. I already knew who it would be. After all, he was loyal. He was careful. He was trained. And most importantly, he owed me. There's a quote I've always loved. If you want to truly control someone, don't silence them. Give them something to protect. That was Derek now. He wasn't guarding his reputation. That was long gone. He was guarding his place, his seat at the table. Even if the table didn't belong to him, even if the food had been cooked in a kitchen he once tried to burn down, he was careful with everything now. Every commit, every comment, every meeting note. I watched him become meticulous. The same recklessness that once made him dangerous was now channeled into stability. He double-checked code dependencies. He documented his logic like it might be read in court. That's the thing about guilt. It makes people work harder than ambition ever could. He was no longer chasing glory. He was chasing permission to stay. I monitored him through our system's back-end heat maps. Yes, I had my own dashboard. No one else saw it. A private panel where I tracked engagement data across the team keystroke volume file activity time spent in terminal calendar patterns. It wasn't about spying. It was about proof. And Derek's chart was the same week after week. Consistent. Focused. Quiet. He didn't even take full weekends anymore. Once I pinged him on a Sunday night just to see if he'd respond. He replied in 90 seconds. "Hey Ezra, just polishing a few edge case handlers. What's up?" That was his new normal. He didn't clock in. He belonged to the system now, and I was the system. We were prepping our next experimental module internally called Glassline. This one would be the most invasive yet. A cognitive fatigue monitor that could flag users experiencing emotional overwhelm before they crashed. Think of it as an early warning system for panic. It would change everything, especially for high-stakes jobs. Surgeons, air traffic controllers, startup founders, war zone journalists. But to build it, I needed real-world modeling. I needed someone with fragile intensity, a rhythm that danced on the edge of breakdown but never tipped. Derek was perfect. He didn't know he was the test subject. I disguised the telemetry pings inside a performance audit. He ran the reports himself. He thought he was measuring latency. He was measuring himself. The results, astounding. His stress signature was the most complex in the company high-resolution data on how guilt twists concentration, how shame extends focus, how delayed recognition shifts, dopamine spikes. I fed his pattern into the Glassline model. It boosted accuracy by 17%. I could have told him. I could have said, "You're helping build the future by being the best kind of broken." But what good would that do? This wasn't about him anymore. It never really was. Derek was a tool, and every tool needs calibration, not conversation. He continued to deliver. He became the guy junior engineers went to with quiet questions. He wrote documentation that people actually read. He didn't ask for raises, didn't push for visibility, didn't speak out of turn. He became the dream employee for a dream he didn't invent and could never fully claim. And then came the event. Our first in-person summit since Sable launched. 200 employees, 3 days, 1 beachfront resort, panels, workshops, bonding games, the whole tech ritual thing. Derek flew out early, wore the branded fleece, took the shuttle from the airport with the interns. When I arrived, I found him standing near the edge of the balcony alone, staring at the ocean. He didn't see me at first. When he turned, he smiled. Hey, he said. Nice place. Yeah, I said. Figured it was time. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but I didn't give him the chance. I clapped a hand on his shoulder. Let's go inside, I said. The system doesn't run itself. He nodded, followed. That was it. No speeches, no catharsis, no grand reckoning. Just a man walking beside the shadow he once betrayed. Building, here following. Proving, forever. The summit ended with a toast. Nothing dramatic. Just a warm evening on the rooftop deck. Sea breeze tangling with string lights. Soft jazz bleeding from a Bluetooth speaker. Engineers, designers, investors. All clinking glasses, laughing over inside jokes, trading Slack handles, and war stories from the trenches of product launches. I stood off to the side, glass in hand, watching it all. This machine, it worked. It breathed, and it was bigger than Pulse Point ever could have been. That's when Derek approached me. He had a ginger ale in hand. No alcohol. Not anymore. Can I ask you something? He said. I nodded slowly. He hesitated. Then, why did you keep me? His voice wasn't bitter. It was tired, worn down to its honest parts. I stared at him. This man, this thief turned tool turned symbol, the ghost that once haunted me now, stood 3 feet away, asking for meaning. And for once I gave it to him. You showed up, I said. And you didn't stop. That's it. That's everything. He nodded. But I knew that answer would replay in his head 100 times, because he was still hoping for absolution, still hoping I'd say you're forgiven. But I wouldn't, because forgiveness closes a story, and I wasn't done with him yet. He stayed by my side the rest of the evening. We spoke about the future modular AI overlays, adaptive empathy triggers, machine learning, and HR tech. He nodded, took notes, already eager to get back into the build. He still didn't realize. He wasn't just helping shape the next product. He was the next product. That night, as the summit came to a close and people filtered back into hotel rooms or Uber rides, I slipped away to my suite. I opened my laptop, checked the Glassline test model. His fatigue index had spiked during our rooftop conversation. Of course it had. He'd been vulnerable, and vulnerability costs more than effort. I saved the new data signature. Label. Subject DMR15. Time-stamped. Tagged. Versioned. It would make the model even stronger, more human, more predictive, and I smiled. Not because I won, not because I'd broken him, but because I'd used him to build something better. He once stole my idea. Now he was my idea, a living reminder of what happens when betrayal doesn't destroy you. It sharpens you. A case study wrapped in skin, and maybe that's the greatest revenge of all. He works for me. He builds for me. He breaks himself for me. And I never had to raise my voice. Not once. Derek Maddox once stole my startup idea, presented it as his own, and rode the spotlight while I disappeared into silence. But instead of chasing courtroom justice or public sympathy, I built something better. A system stronger than ego, scalable beyond betrayal, and resilient enough to turn revenge into structure. Over years, I rebuilt my product from scratch, reshaped it into Sable, then evolved it again into Cinder products, so refined and precise, they disrupted the very industry Derek once hoped to dominate. Then I did the unthinkable. I hired him. I embedded him in my system. Slowly, strategically, I made him build the very product he once destroyed. Not for fame, not for glory, but out of necessity and debt. Through a quiet sequence of tasks, promotions, and invisible chains, I turned him from thief to servant, not by force, but by need. He sought redemption. I gave him responsibility. And I used his every keystroke to perfect the next evolution of the system, feeding his data into models that now predict human breakdowns better than any psychologist ever could. This is not a story about rage. It's about order. Revenge doesn't need noise. It needs design. So if you're still listening, remember this. You don't have to fight to win. You just have to outlive the theft and make the thief build your empire. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the next story might just be the one you needed to hear before it's too late. End of script. Good night.